happened in the first week, we talked about Paul is writing this letter to Galatia. I drew up my map, so in case you're not clear what this is the Mediterranean. This is Italy, Greece. This is what's nowadays Turkey, but back then would be called more like Asia Minor. This is the Holy Land, so you have Judea, Samaria, Galilee. And what's down here? Yeah, Egypt. And what river is that? Nile. Yep, we're still in denial. So there we go. Let's go. I had a history teacher who said that every time he taught world history and drew a map. You know, it's like, I love that joke. Feel free to use it at all your parties. But Galatia is like right here in the middle of what we would call Turkey nowadays. There's a bunch of different regions around here. So this is Cappadocia, Sicilia, Pamphylia, Lycia. This would be called Asia. We often just call it Asia Minor. So it's broken up into different governing regions at this point. It's just a way to organize things. Even down here, Galilee, Samaria, and Judea, sometimes they're governed jointly, like under Herod the Great. Other times they're governed separately, like Pontius Pilate and Herod have that split between the two of them during the death of Jesus. It's a big, complicated Roman world. What happened was Paul said that the people had fallen away from the gospel which he had first preached to them. They were following a different gospel, and that they were accursed for doing so. Wow, that's quite the claim to make here. We didn't really identify who his opponents were. And we also mentioned this is the first book written in the New Testament. What a way to start the New Testament. They didn't know they were writing the New Testament back then, but you know. He writes his first letter to Galatians, so this is very early. What we're going to be looking at here is Paul is going to explain how can he say that he was sent by God. So let's start at verse 10. For am I now seeking approval of man or of God? Or am I trying to please man? If I were still trying to please man, I would not be a servant of Christ. Now, who here has a little footnote next to the word servant, where it's got a little number or something like that in your Bible? Probably they all do. And does anyone have a word other than servant there in your translation? Every Bible says servant. Okay, that's fine. Just curious there. This is a Greek word that people often have trouble with in the New Testament because they'll either translate it as servant or they'll translate it as slave. And the Greek word here is a Greek word that's called doulos. And just for fun, I'll write it on the board that nobody can read. There we go. Got to make sure that I'm getting the most out of my education. Doulos. There we go. That's the D. Doulos. And the problem with doulos is if we say slave, we think American slavery, and that's not a good definition of that. And if we say servant, we think English butler. And that's not correct either. So it's neither of those things. So this is a tough thing. I'm going to take my mask off so you can hear me better. Here we go.
It says bondservant under my...
Bondservant is probably the best English equivalent, except nobody knows what that means. What is a bondservant?
You had to be a servant to someone for so many years.
Yeah, that's kind of like the indentured servitude sort of thing. And so this is somehow, it's a servant who has a special bond with their master. That's the idea that they're going on here. So doulos has something a little bit more like there. However, they are definitely still in slavery. But slavery in the Roman world looks different than slavery in the Americas. It's complicated, big complicated Roman world here. One of the interesting things that's noted here is that for a doulos here, because of the type of slave that they would actually acquire a rank equivalent to whatever their master was, which is kind of an odd idea. So let's say you have the mayor, you know, the Greek equivalent of a mayor. You have the mayor, let's just say that there, and you are the bond slave of the mayor. You would actually outrank the farmer. And you would outrank the lowly merchants. Not the wealthy merchants, maybe, but you'd outrank the lowly merchants who are free. And so this is the sort of thing here. Being actually the slave of Christ would actually be like a big social step up because you're the slave of God himself. So it's a bizarre kind of term that we have here. So if we're saying that Christ is supreme, that Paul's saying he is his slave or servant, it's kind of like saying, like, I'm in the court of the king. It's kind of like being on the president's cabinet. You know, you won't be able to go up to the Secretary of State and say, you know what, you're not your own boss. You know, that must be terrible. It's like, I'm the Secretary of State of the United States. I'm sorry, I outrank everybody here in this room, you know. There's very few people who outrank that man.
Would that sort of be like Joseph?
Yes, Joseph's a good example there, because while Joseph by no means has his freedom and independence, he is second in Egypt and is ranked above everybody else. Even despite the fact he's a Hebrew. I mean, they just kind of overlook that.
But when he was a slave.
Oh, when he's a slave? So like when he's Potiphar's slave, would he have a higher rank because he's Potiphar's slave?
Not an ancient Egypt.
How? I don't know. I'd have to do more research on ancient Egyptian slavery, and there might not even be an answer to this one. I'll be honest.
That's your assignment for the week.
Thank you. It's one of those fools there. It's like, go figure out how ancient Egyptian slavery worked. No, not the Hebrews in slavery, the stuff that happened 400 years before that. I'll be like, great.
He loves these little assignments. We've done this before.
Yeah. I don't know if I can find that. I'll just be, there are some things that I know if I look for it, it just might not exist, because there's just not enough information. Like, that's the nice thing about the New Testament. We have enough history that we can actually figure things out. That's actually probably one of the reasons I like the Old Testament more. We just get stuff that we're just like, Anyway, good questions. Bruce, you had your hand up.
Several thoughts. I remember reading many years ago that about a third in the Roman Empire, about a third of the population were slaves.
Mm-hmm.
Another thought is the wicked servant had the authority of his master, so it's almost like he had a slave had a power of attorney for the master.
Yeah, very much they could stand in as a proxy for the master. So you're thinking the parable of the wicked servant, where the master says, you're in charge, and he says, well, I'm the master then. And in all intents and purposes, he is the master until the master returns, and then he abuses that power. This would be something where, because of who Jesus is talking about, the Israelites, they would understand this, because he even says things like this. You know, you look at the Pharisees and the priests, they sit in the seat of Moses. You know, they're very much in the seat of God there, because they're teaching the people. The priests are standing in for God there, in their services. Get to the New Testament church, that's what the pastor's doing. He's standing in the place of Christ in the church service. Woe be the pastor who abuses that. So this is exactly right. Yeah. The slave is a proxy.
If you look at your own role, if you look at the rubrics, if you're facing the congregation, you're speaking for God. If you're facing the cross, you're speaking for the congregation.
Only if I remember to do them correctly, Bruce. Yes, you are correct. If you look at the traditional liturgical facing of the pastor, Bruce is 100% correct, and I'm going to repeat it because it's worth hearing. If the pastor is facing you during the church service, it usually is that he is speaking the words that Christ would speak to you. And if he's facing the cross, it's the words that the people are saying to God. So the correct liturgical facing, and I'm saying this is a man-made thing, it's a tradition. So it's not, if we do it wrong, we are sinning. It would be that, for example, the prayers you face the cross and not the people. One of the reasons to face the people during the prayers is you can hear us better.
Yeah.
And there's other reasons like that. Some pastors, I know, like to go into the middle of the congregation for prayer because I'm praying with the people there. There are reasons often for these things to be done. One of the key ones to notice is the beginning of the service. Invocation, face the people. Confession, you turn around. Absolution, you turn back and face the people. It would feel really weird if I had my back to you while I forgave everyone's sins. Your sins are forgiven. You're like, ooh, who are you talking to? Communion is actually one where there is actually, if you want to read some really boring stuff, you can read about where you should be facing during communion. Should it all be facing towards the congregation, or should it be facing towards the cross? Our altar is designed that it is freestanding, meaning you can get behind the altar. Some altars are built so that the pastor cannot go back there, so it's not even an option. Yes, please.
Pastor, as a former vicar, did you feel like you were number 2 or a servant here?
I love that question. You asked when I was a vicar here, did I feel like I was a number 2 or a servant? I still feel that way. Sorry. Yes. No, but that's the thing I try not to toot my own horn here, But I don't ever want to be like hair pastor. And I don't want this to be the Church of David Maves. And if it becomes that, I'm doing my job poorly. The pastor is the servant of the congregation, not the other way around.
I just wondered how they taught that at the SEM as to how to take your place in the congregation as a vicar.
As a vicar, they said, do whatever your senior tells you to, and please don't cause a problem. that was the gist of it. Whatever pastor you are assigned to, just do what they tell you to do, and please, it's like, don't argue with them. Don't tell them they're wrong. You don't know what you're doing yet. And I took that advice. Some of my classmates did not. They had some painful experiences. I mean, some guys needed the hard knock of being put in their place. Some guys don't come back from vicarage either. And there's a reason for that.
And some guys get a super vicar.
Right, super vicar.
Yeah. You know, I've only heard of one. Do you guys know that name came from Detroit pastors making fun of me? We were in a meeting with Detroit pastors and they all made fun of me. And then the whole congregation started calling me that. Yeah, I was like being bullied for a whole year. It was great. No, it was wonderful. I very much appreciated the joke. But yeah, they were definitely making fun of me. Good for them. Yeah, we need a vicar so I have someone to make fun of. Huh. Anyway. What? Yeah, not yet. Anyway, we'll be going. So Paul, back to what we're actually talking about here. He's saying, am I seeking the approval of man? The obvious answer here is he's saying, no, I'm not. I'm not just trying to say what pleases you, nor is he going to make the claim, I am trying to do the will of the other apostles. I'm not sent by Peter. I am not sent by James. I am not sent by any of those guys. I'm sent by God. And that's a really bold claim to make. Imagine we had a guest preacher who came and says, I have come with a direct message from God. I'd probably stand up and be like, time out. Let's have a little talk back here. What are you going to say? I mean, that would make me incredibly nervous and skeptical, as I think rightly we should be. Paul here is saying that God sent him. And I think rightfully so, the Galatians should be skeptical of this, but this is what he has to say. So this is the next section where he kind of explains his history here and lays out his claim is like, I'm claiming to be an apostle sent by God. Here's my story in brief. Now, this is a story they would already know because he helped found these churches. But he is, again, going over it again to make sort of his claim here. I was told by Nate that when we speak, it's good enough to just kind of pick up other people's voices if they speak good and loud. So do I have a volunteer to read for me verses 11, it's a long section, 11 to 24. And then we'll go back verse by verse. A volunteer to read. Nice, clear, loud, fearlessly. Thank you, Sue.
For I would have you know, brothers, that the gospel that was preached by me is not man's gospel. For I did not receive it from any man, nor was I taught it, but I received it through a revelation of Jesus Christ. For you have heard of my former life in Judaism, how I persecuted the church of God violently and tried to destroy it. And I was advancing in Judaism beyond many of my own age among my people. So extremely zealous was I for the traditions of my fathers. But when he who had set me apart before I was born, and who called me by his grace, was pleased to reveal his Son to me in order that I might preach him among the Gentiles, I did not immediately consult with anyone, nor did I go up to Jerusalem to those who were apostles before me, but I went away into Arabia and returned again to Damascus. Then, after 3 years, I went up to Jerusalem to visit Cephas and remained with him 15 days. But I saw none of the other apostles except James, the Lord's brother. In what I am writing to you before God, I do not lie. Then I went into the regions of Syria and Cilicia, and I was still unknown in person to the churches of Judea that are in Christ. They only were hearing it said, he who used to persecute us is now preaching the faith he once tried to destroy. And they glorified God because of me.
Okay. So this is the story of Paul up to a certain point here. So let's kind of go back to the beginning and then we'll go back. Let's do sort of a timeline sort of thing here. So So I said last week, and I'll put this on the board here, let's get a little timestamps here. And now these are 2,000 years ago. It's our best guesses on these dates. But these are not my guesses. These are the guesses of smarter people than me. I'm just reading the book. So we have the year 30. We're going to put that as the death of Christ. And then 35-ish, we have Paul's conversion. Okay. So when Paul makes the comment that he has not been to Jerusalem except for that short 15-day visit that he was talking about, he is not talking about when he was practicing Judaism. He is talking about after he sees Christ on the road to Damascus. So we'll put Damascus here-ish. That looks good. I should put it in blue. Okay. Yeah. Damascus. So we got Damascus, big city. So he is in Jerusalem, down here in Judea. So this is our Jerusalem down here. So he's down in Jerusalem, and that is where he is persecuting the church because the entirety of the church is in Jerusalem. He doesn't really have a choice. If he wants to persecute Christians, that's where he is. So the stoning of Stephen takes place in Jerusalem, and if you remember the stoning of Stephen, it says that the people who killed Stephen laid their cloaks at Saul's feet because he was the one who ordered the execution. Despite the fact he was a young Pharisee, because that's what he is, he's a Pharisee, he is the one saying, like, kill this man. And they all say, yeah, we'll jump right to it, Saul. Or saying, thanks for authorizing it, or whatever they're doing there. And then he goes around Jerusalem seeking to destroy the church through arrest and violence. That is his goal there. He says that he was excelling in Judaism by many of my own age and people. Yeah, he was the valedictorian of his class, if you want to think about it that way. He was brilliant young Pharisee. Everyone, they say, here's our rising star Pharisee. Because the Pharisees were important, they were well regarded, they'd have sort of a celebrity status, the big ones.
Do you have a rough idea of his age as this was happening?
It's a good question. You get the sense that like around 30 he would have been a young man of some sort here. And so when we're writing this here, because if he's a young man at 30, let's say he's 30 at 30, yeah, let's go with that. That'd be kind of easy there. Then he lives only to the year 67. But he doesn't die of natural causes, he's beheaded. So, but you get the sense he's getting up there in years by that point. So in his 60s, that's reasonable to kind of say there. The reason why you don't, by the time of this, he's probably 30, because really before 30, they're not going to listen to him. He wouldn't be considered a rabbi until after that time period there. Because you would, in the Jewish culture, you need to be 30 to be a rabbi, and you need to be approved by 2 different rabbis at that point there. Hence, Jesus begins his public ministry when he's 30, and it's reasonable to think that John the Baptist did too. Yeah, so that's the tradition back then. Yes, Karen?
So was he studying in Tarsus while Jesus was doing his ministry, or?
It's interesting there, because the one person he does mention studying is Gamaliel. And everyone's like, oh yeah, Gamaliel. Okay, Gamaliel is mentioned in the book of Acts as well as being a member of the Sanhedrin, which means he would be primarily stationed in Jerusalem. So it's interesting that Saul of Tarsus, Tarsus is a city of origin. So was he back in Tarsus during the life of Jesus, or was he in Jerusalem, like finishing his studies or just having finished his studies during this whole thing here?
A good historical fiction book.
Yeah, this is yes. Okay, great. That sparked your imagination here. And this is a good question that people have here. Would Saul have seen Jesus before he died? And there's a good chance he did. I'm just going to say that. It is possible that he was sent away to do work somewhere else. Maybe from Tarsus, he was sent back to Tarsus. They would actually, I'm going to forget their names. The Shekinah. That's what they're called. I hope I'm saying that correctly. The Pharisees would actually send members of the Pharisaical order to actually do missionary trips to the different cities throughout the Roman Empire that had Jewish populations. And it may have been that he was out on one of those. It's a possibility. But it's like it's all guesswork because he doesn't say. I would say he probably didn't firsthand witness Jesus before he was crucified because he never mentions it. That's probably the biggest thing that I would say there. He never mentions seeing one of the miracles or the teachings of Jesus. But he is a contemporary of those sort of people there. Yeah. It's also notable here that we mentioned that Paul is like valedictorian level Pharisee of his class. Compare that to the rest of the disciples. And you realize, oh, wait a minute. It's kind of like one of those things where you're like, wait a minute here. And if he got together with all the other disciples, which, doesn't really happen. Well, it happens once. We'll talk about that later. If he got together with all the disciples, he'd be the best educated in the room. If you want to compare Peter and him, Peter failed out of high school. He has multiple doctorates. It's like that kind of disparity here. You think that might have been a point of yeah, you can see that there might be tension there. As Peter writes about Paul's letters, he's like, the things that Paul writes are sometimes difficult and hard to understand. Like, I bet they are, Peter. I agree with Peter, though, there. But then Peter backs it up, he says, and they are distorted like they do to all Scripture. So he identifies Paul's works as Scriptures, even though he sort of sometimes says they're a little hard to understand. Which they are. Read Romans. Ugh. A little hard to understand. Okay, so he is in Jerusalem, he is persecuting the church. The church starts fleeing from Jerusalem, so he's saying, I want to go hunt down Christians wherever they're fleeing to. Let's not let them start up in new cities and cause new problems there. So that's when he gets letters from the high priest. So he's a Pharisee, and he gets the permission of the high priest. They don't like each other because they're Sadducees and Pharisees. Priests are Sadducees. He's a Pharisee, and he gets the permission of the high priest. Yeah, go hunt Christians. Go to Damascus. You have my permission as well. So he's got everybody on board. Pharisees and Sadducees go man. And that's what happens. On the road to Damascus, Christ appears and he is blinded. He goes into the city, he prays and fasts for 3 days, and then a Christian comes to him by the name of Ananias. Yeah, that is great. I didn't expect anyone to know that. Ananias comes, and what does he do to him? How does he restore his sight?
Praise for him.
And does one other thing.
And hands on his face.
Baptizes him. Yeah, don't forget that part. It's a big thing. He's baptized. Yeah, there you go. And that's when he starts off being a Christian. Now you can read those parts in Acts that he immediately begins, because this guy has never been quiet in his life, nor do I think he knew how to kind of keep his peace. He immediately goes out and starts proclaiming Christ risen. It's interesting that Paul's conversion is not so much like a U-turn of personality, like he goes from being one person, goes the opposite direction. It's more like a course correction, where he is this zealous, fiery Jew, and then he becomes a zealous, fiery Christian. It's not a huge course correction for. It's just sort of like he's got it all right except for Christ. And if you think about from Paul's point of view, if Christ is just another liar and false Messiah, he's like, we need to stop this right now. It is taking people away from worship of the true God. But once he realizes that Jesus really is who he says to be, he's like, wait. We got to get everyone on board here. And it makes sense, kind of his change there. Okay. Okay, so then he talks about it, that he did not go up immediately to Jerusalem. He's making this point here because he's got a problem with Jerusalem, which we're going to find out in the next chapter here. So he's downplaying he's saying, I don't have a connection to the church of Jerusalem, the center of Christianity at this point. But I went away into Arabia. Where's Arabia? On the map. It's like here. Yeah, just click it down here. Arabia. I should put that on the map. Which color am I in? Arabia. So he's down here in Arabia. So he goes from Damascus and he goes down there to Arabia. What's he doing in Arabia? I went away into Arabia. Why would he go away into Arabia?
Trying to figure out what's going on.
Yeah, it's probably a good time to reflect on things. That is honestly probably why he's going to Arabia. The other thing is he is also, here we'll just go ahead and look at it here quick. If you go to Acts chapter 9. Alright, so Acts chapter 9 is the conversion of Saul. Verse about 20 he starts proclaiming Jesus in the synagogue. So he was sent. He still has his letter from the chief priests and the Pharisees saying he represents them. And he goes into the synagogue and what does he say? Jesus Christ is Lord. Yeah, I'm sure that went over well. And Saul increased in more strength and confounded the Jews who lived in Damascus by proving that Jesus is the Christ. So what's the reaction there? Verse 23. Somebody read 23 through 25.
After many days had gone by, the Jews conspired to kill him. But Saul learned of their plan. Day and night they kept close watch on the city gates in order to kill him. But his followers took him by night and lowered him in a basket through an opening in the wall.
Okay, so he has to run for his life. And so this is probably, it's like, yeah, he's got a good time to reflect there, but also get out of town, buddy. And Arabia is a good place to hide from people because it's sparsely populated. There's a lot of desert there. So he goes and he's hiding. He says here, because in Acts you notice that the very next thing in Acts is Saul goes back to Jerusalem. And here he tells that did not happen as quick as we have it. Because if we read Acts in Luke's account, it's kind of like, oh, he went from there. The next important thing is Jerusalem. But Paul here is giving, well, there's a couple other things in here that he would consider, happened to him, but they're not. Luke's like saying, we don't need to go into those details. But Saul does here. Saul mentions that he went to Arabia. He returns back to Damascus. He's not a runner. This is one of the things you'll see in Paul's missionary journeys, where he will get like, which is the city where he gets stoned? It's Laodicea, right? Everyone's just going to nod and say, just nod at me. Okay. Yeah, I think it is. All right, I wasn't planning on talking about this, but I'm pretty sure it's Laodicea, Lystra. Was it Lystra? Where were you stoned, Paul? Sorry, I need to know this now.
Before you forget, ask Siri.
What did you say?
Ask Siri. Say, hey Siri, where was Paul Stone?
Yeah, I don't trust the overmind. Anyway, I should know this. I just don't for some reason.
Lystra.
It was Lystra?
Yeah.
Oh yeah, I should remember that because it reminds me of Listerine, and I don't know, that doesn't help me at all. Yeah, it is Lystra. Oh, that's right. Lystra, not Laodicea. I had the L right. All right, but Lystra, this is a good example of him. Is that it's Acts 14:19, where he is in Lystra, and what happens is they come over and they stone him. Much like Stephen, they throw rocks at him until they think he's dead. He's not dead, actually. They suppose him to be dead, and when they go to get him, what happens is he gets up and he goes back in the city. So he just got dragged out of the city and stoned, so what does Paul do? He's like, I'm going back. And can you imagine some of his friends being like, hey, you sure you don't want to, anything else? You want to find a hospital? What are you doing, bud? And so this is what happens here. He just, charges right back into the fray of the things. Very true of him. He doesn't run. It's been noted here that it appears that Paul was under house arrest in Rome, and he gets released, and then he comes back when the persecution heats up. He's not a runner. Not going to do that kind of guy. Anyway, I am talking a lot. So, his time in Damascus in Arabia, we'll put that as about 35 to 37. So Damascus and Arabia. That's when he's there. Gotta stick with my lesson plan here. Okay, and then in Acts and here, he also mentions his stay in Jerusalem. In Acts, it is mentioned that at first the brothers are not interested in receiving him. But Barnabas is the one who kind of says, no, I trust this man. And they listen to Barnabas because Barnabas is very well respected among them. He shows up earlier in Acts. And as Bruce rightly pointed out, it is Barnabas and Saul as the team this time, not the other way around. Barnabas is the big hitter. So, we have him returning to Jerusalem for these 15 days. So it's not a long stay here. And he visits a guy named Cephas. Now this is hard. Who is Cephas? Peter, thank you. Yes, this has to do with Greek. The Greek word Cephas would translate to the word Peter. So he has multiple names. Simon, Peter, Cephas, Rocky, yeah, Rocky would work. One time Jesus calls him Satan, but no one else does. Yeah, so there we go. So that's his visit. So his visit would be about 37. He goes to Jerusalem. And the other one he meets is James. So he meets Peter, leader of the 12 disciples, and he meets James. Why mention James? Is James important?
James, the brother of Jesus.
It is the brother of Jesus, half-brother of Jesus, if we want to get really good here. But why is James important? Does anyone know why James is important in the New Testament?
Head of the church.
Yes, he was head of the church in Jerusalem.
Please wait until I call on you before you shout out your answer. I'm surprised being married to a first grade teacher that you never learned that.
Tell him to raise his hand whenever he speaks, but he hasn't quite caught on yet.
Yeah, I know. It's all that training as a lawyer. You just stand up and yell objection, and I have to listen to you then, right? I love this. Yeah, so that is exactly right. He is the leader of Jerusalem, the church in Jerusalem. When we get to the Council of Jerusalem, James has the final word. Like, he is the one who says, okay, I heard what everyone says, I'm making my decision now. It's like, who put you in charge, James? He's in charge. Notably, after when Paul returns to Jerusalem and is then captured, his last visit there are no disciples there. But James is still there running the church in Jerusalem. So yeah, he's important. He is running the center of Christianity. He is in charge of that church there. The other thing that you will see here in Galatians is we're going to talk about is James, an enemy of Paul, right now. And we're going to talk about that. Because he will make a claim that there are people who are coming from James who are preaching a different gospel. And we'll talk about that claim in a week or two, or 3. See how long it takes. It's probably going to, anyway. We're doing well on time here. Jerusalem. So we are in Jerusalem here. All right. So where does Paul go after this? He doesn't really say this, but just to let you know kind of what to get you up to speed to the present here. After this, we know the next place that we see Paul is in Antioch. What do we got here?
He says he went into the regions of Syria and Sicily.
Yep, Syria and Sicilia. Cecilia. I like Cecilia better. She's breaking my heart. Anyway. It's like Kikilla, if you want to get Greek on me. Okay, so that's like up here. This is Kikilla. This is Syria over here. And he is in the city of Antioch. Is his center city there. Antioch is a center of Christianity already very early on. Antioch is the first place that they are called Christians. That's where the word comes from. Before that, they were called followers of the way, which we would never agree with it because it kind of sounds like a hippie name. It's like, we're the church of the way. Man. It's like, I don't know if we can do that. It's like Christians were like, yeah, that's a nice strong sound.
That's where the way Bible came from.
Yes, actually, anytime it's the way, because that's the earliest name for the Christians. They're called followers of the way. And then in Antioch, they call them Christians because they weren't hippies, I guess. Very red state, I don't know. But that's, I don't know actually why, but it works a lot better in Greek.
Well, Jesus said, I am the way.
Yes, I'm saying it's a good name. It is a good name. Despite my silliness, it is a good name. But Christian being one who is like Christ, well, that really encapsulates it easier. That's just a little history there.
People want to get more confused, which way?
Yeah, which way. So he is doing this ministry here, but the thing is he's there for a long time. So what happens is we have like 46, when he starts his first missionary journey. So that's like 9 years before we kind of get him missionary. So we're looking at that long time period here, where he is traveling around through all these regions here. And this is where he leaves Antioch, and he goes up into here, and he comes back. Oh, wait, he actually goes this way. Anyway, that was helpful.
Okay.
That was helpful. I forgot he went to an island first. All right, you can look it up online. There's better maps out there than this. So that is what happens here. He does his first missionary journey. We're looking for that to finish up around the year 48. And then we have a conflict with Peter. This is going to come up in Galatians. He has a conflict with Peter. I spelled it wrong. I like how someone said it's okay. I'm sure every teacher is going, fix it now. There it is. I added an L. And that's about 40, oh, 48. That's better. 48. 49. This is hard to write. I don't know how teachers do this. This is the Council of Jerusalem, which I've alluded to about 17 times in this class already. But it's a very significant event in the Bible and in church history. Council of Jerusalem. Oh wait. Galatians is written right here. This is the writing of Galatians, between 48 and 49. It's after the conflict with Peter, before the Council of Jerusalem. That is the time period that we're doing here. We can definitively say Council of Jerusalem 49-80. So that's how we did this whole thing here. There we go.
I have a question, I might have missed this. Was the Council of Jerusalem because of the conflict with Peter?
In large part, yes. The Council of Jerusalem has to do with the center issue in Galatians, which is, do Christians have to follow the laws of Moses? The one that comes up particularly in Galatians are the dietary laws and also circumcision. So that's what's going on in Galatians. That's the conflict. And so at the Council of Jerusalem, if you go to Acts chapter 15, and we'll just read like one verse here. 15:1. But some men came down from Judea and were teaching the brothers, unless you are circumcised according to the custom of Moses, you cannot be saved. So you are saved by Jesus and circumcision. Ooh, it's a Jesus and sort of gospel here. So you're only saved if you believe in Jesus Christ and are circumcised. Do you see why Paul would say you are teaching another gospel here? Because this has gone from being saved by the grace of Jesus Christ. You are saved only by Jesus Christ and this additional work. So what saves you? That work does. This act saves you, and not Jesus. So yeah, that's why Paul says, let them be accursed, because he means it's like, this is so off base. How can you dare say this? Go ahead, Karen.
You were saying, you were saying the way, that's kind of like the way of the Lord.
Yes, it is.
Because, we always said, and I'm just saying for points, but, it was the, how can we do something if we don't know if the Lord is with us?
Right.
You know what I mean? It's because we as Christians can't do anything unless, we have some guidance, from the Lord.
All right, thank you. All right,
Okay.
so what we have here is then Paul muddies things a little bit for us, where he says he visits Jerusalem a second time with Barnabas. And he also takes Titus with him. What is Titus known for? He wrote?
The book of Titus.
He didn't write the book, he's the recipient of it. Paul writes Titus to Titus. So it's the book written to Titus, just as Timothy is the book written to Timothy, and Philemon is the book written to Philemon. So these are the personal letters of Paul. So Titus is somebody who works with Paul, so he's mentioned here. This is chapter 2. Then after 14 years, I went up again to Jerusalem with Barnabas, taking Titus along with me. So he's saying 14 years after his first visit, there is a second trip up to Jerusalem. So what year would that put? If we said the first trip is 37, what's the second one?
51?
Yeah, about 14, then after 14 years, I went up to Jerusalem. And if we put it at 51, that puts us outside the Council of Jerusalem. Okay, what's another option here? Another option that is saying that after 14 years from his conversion, what year would that put it at?
49.
Yeah. which also kind of does it here. And this is the strongest argument that people have for saying that, for a later writing in Galatians here. I'm going to say that despite that, and this is going to sound weird for a moment here, but bear with me for a second here. I'm going to put it actually earlier, and I'll talk about why in a second here. I am... All right, so after 14 years, I'm going to actually put it at 45. And you're going, that's bad math, Pastor. It is. So let's talk about why we're doing this. Second visit. And you're like, that is 8 years, not 14. How do you make 14 into an 8? Okay. One of the things that is notable here is the ancients, how they count times. And this is something that you're not going to like here. Their math is kind of goofy. When they say 14 years, we could count that as either 14 years or 12 years. Let's talk about this. Because the way they do this is they count time as inclusive. And so what happens is they would say that even if it was part of a year, they would count that year as well. So this sounds confusing here. So I'm trying to think of a good example here. Let's say that we had something that happened in December of last year, and it ran to December of this year. How long did that last for us?
1 year.
But the ancients would say it was 2 years because it took place during 2 different years. And what if it ran from December of 2019 to January of 2021? How long would we say that ran? No, we'd say that ran a year. We would say that. They would say 3 years. Because we're like, it was a year, and they had a month on either end there. We might even say it was 1.2 years or something like that. We might get picky like that. A year and 60 days. They would say that was a 3-year event. We would by no means say that was a 3-year event. This is something we run into with the time Jesus was sent in the tomb. How long did they say Jesus was in the tomb? 3 days. He was in there 1 day, guys. He died on Friday. He was in there Saturday, and he got out on Sunday. That's 1 day, right? But he's in there for parts of those other 2 days, so they counted as 3 days. So this is something that makes actually dating very difficult, because they'll say this king this king or emperor or Caesar, he had a reign that lasted 20 years. And we're like, does that mean 20 years, or does that mean 22 years, or 21 years? And this actually creates problems for us.
So Pastor, does that mean that the 14 years in chapter 2 have been changed through translation over time?
No. I'm saying he wrote 14 years, and in his mind he's thinking 14 years, but I'm explaining when he says 14 years, we might not call that 14 years. This is more of cultural issues than it has to do with a translation issue. The word he uses is 14. That's not the issue here. The issue is saying, what do they think when they say 14 versus what I say with 14? Yeah, I know. That's like a terrible sort of like thing there. It's something you'll even get with English speakers where they mean different things and different things. A common one being like in the South, they call all soda Coke. What kind of Coke do you want? I want a Sprite. Okay, makes sense to them, doesn't make sense to us. This is the sort of thing. The thought process behind the word is different. So the question is, where is this time period coming out? Where is the 14 years coming at this? Is it the number of years from his conversion, or is it from his last trip to Jerusalem? So this is where we have this sort of thing here. So what I'm arguing here, and I'm going to argue this from evidence in Galatians, that this makes much more sense. That he is arguing that it is from his conversion, and you're saying that's even closer to like 10 years there. But that's what he's arguing for here. And that's what I'm going to go with. The reason why we don't push this out here is because he resolves this issue at the Council of Jerusalem. So that's the argument I'm making here. There are, as I said, critics of the Bible who really want to push the Council of Jerusalem happens and then the events of Galatians, but that's because they want to show a church in conflict. And that's kind of their main emphasis here for this sort of thing here. Are there questions here? Because I'm okay if there are questions here, because I know what I explained was complicated and confusing, and I don't think I explained it well. So please, ask a question if you have one. Dennis?
So what, your last statement, some people want to push it out because why?
Because there are opponents to the Bible being God's word. It's people who are saying the Bible isn't God's word. And they want to show that Galatians was written after the Council of Jerusalem, to say that after the Council of Jerusalem, nothing was settled, and the church continued its infighting and bickering, and different strong personalities each tried to take the church in their own direction. That's what they want to do. So that's why they put it there. Whereas I'm saying, no, they resolve it, because it lines up so nicely. It's very easy to say, here's the conflict in Galatia, they show up in Jerusalem, and they fix it. Man, it's really great stuff.
You know, there are people now that are still saying that about the 3 days of Christ in the tomb.
What?
They're saying that this is inaccurate in the Bible, saying that he was in the grave 3 days.
There aren't many people who do that, actually, because most scholars recognize it. There is like a subgroup of Christianity that I've run into that are saying that Jesus was crucified on Wednesday instead of Friday. And they do that by they like, well, Jesus needs to be in the grave 3 days and 3 nights.
And do they not also say that the real Sabbath is Saturday?
Everyone says that. I don't know of anyone that argues that the real Sabbath isn't Saturday. But yeah, there are some who hold to that too. So there are groups of Christians that do that. I don't know any critics of the Bible that argue the 3 days thing. Because despite the fact they're critics of the Bible, they're historians. They understand that they counted things like this. They understand inclusive dating. So that's not an issue for them.
So how is Sunday established as a Sabbath?
Okay, why do we worship on Sunday was the question there. Alright, so Saturday is the Sabbath. That's the 7th day of the week, day God rested, the day that God made holy. The reason the Christians worshipped on Sunday was to celebrate Easter. And so every Sunday is a celebration of Easter. This you'll even see in like the church historically, where there are 40 days in Lent, but if you start from Ash Wednesday and go all the way to Easter, you will not count 40 days. You'll count more. The reason they do is they counted every Sunday as a celebration of Easter and not part of Lent. So that's how it worked. Yeah, there you go. And you're like, more bad math, Pastor. Do any theologians know how to do math? Not a single one of us do. That's all we've learned today. All the engineers are over there crying into their calculators, like, why? Why couldn't the Romans written the Bible? They would have done this correctly. They would have. They would have. No, we had a bunch of Hebrews and Greeks. I'm sorry for all of you. Anyway, so theologians are bad at math, so that's why you get that sort of thing there. It also makes sense if you think from the very earliest part, when you're still a Jewish church, the Jewish Christians are meeting in the synagogue with their fellow Jews. Because at that point, they're not so much their own religion, they're kind of just sort of a denomination of Judaism at that point. And so they go and they meet in the synagogue on Saturday, and then the Jewish Christians, then the next day, they meet on Sunday together as Christians and celebrate. That's how you end up with Sunday worship. So yeah. So the Seventh-day Adventists who are saying God gave Saturday as a day of worship, he is absolutely correct, he did. And if you want to say that we are still bound by the Mosaic law, fine. Okay, I have issues with that. But they're correct in saying that Saturday is the true Sabbath. But they also don't follow the rest of the Hebrew calendar, so... Oh, good question, though. That's a very good question. I think we were talking about Galatians. Should probably talk about Galatians. How are we doing on time? Ooh, we're doing terrible. Let's keep going here. That's supposed to be to the end of chapter 2. We've read one verse of it. Yay. Okay. So this second journey is the one that seems to be referred to in Acts here. I know I kind of made that confusing earlier when I mentioned it. But this would be the one that we're talking about here, where he goes back with Barnabas, and Barnabas vouches for him. And this makes more sense for Barnabas vouching for him because he's probably worked with him. So here we have, after 14 years, I went to Jerusalem with Barnabas and taking Titus along with me. I went up because of a revelation. What is a revelation? We've heard this word twice now. What's a revelation? 3 times if you remember last week. What does revelation mean? Something is revealed. Yes, that's what it means. It's not talking about the book of Revelation. It's talking about something is revealed to him. When we say revelation, when he refers to revelation, who does it mean it's from? From a divine one, from God. So that's the idea here, a revelation from God. God revealed something to him. I went up because of a revelation set before me, though privately, before those who seemed influential, the gospel that I proclaimed among the Gentiles in order to make sure I was not running or I'd run in vain. But even Titus, who was with me, was not forced to be circumcised, though he was a Greek. So I mentioned the issue with Galatians is they're saying that circumcision is required for salvation. He mentions this journey back in about the year 45-ish, that he journeys to Jerusalem with Barnabas and Titus. Titus is a Greek. He is not circumcised. And what do the early Christians say in Jerusalem about him not being circumcised? Nothing. They do not demand it. James does not, as the leader of the church of Jerusalem, declare him needing to be circumcised. Neither does Peter or any of the disciples. No one makes that claim to him. And you're like, Pastor, how would they know? They would know. I'm just going to let you know. They'd immediately know he is a Greek, and as soon as he came into their presence, if they were a good practicing Jew, they'd be like, what is he doing here? That's a Greek. Is he actually been converted to Judaism? Has he been circumcised? And they would want to know that. But they're not good practicing Jews. They're Christians, and they don't care. They're going to welcome him in. That's the point here. So they welcomed Titus with open arms despite the fact he was circumcised. Yeah, I'm going to run out of time. So I'll just go into this. It should be remembered that when we're reading about the Pharisees in the days of Jesus and sort of the second temple Judaism that Jesus is living in, they are very strict about who they hang out with. When it says that Jesus eats with tax collectors and sinners, this is verboten, forbidden. They do not do this. It is beyond the pale. And so what he is doing here is this the same thing. You are very careful about whose house you go into. You make sure that you can sit down and eat with them and share the same beliefs and be in part of the same community. They're very exclusive people. And so that's why what Jesus is doing is so radical. It's the same thing where if somebody walked in and they didn't know who they were, they probably have 20 questions to ask them before they let them sit down. Or they say, hey, does anyone know this guy? Is anyone going to vouch for him that he should be sitting here? Because if they find out the guy's a Samaritan, he's a Greek, he's a Roman, he's out. They're not going to let him come in.
So is it fair to say then that James was not aligned with the Judaizers who were complaining about circumcision?
I will say he is not.
Okay.
Because I would say that the good evidence is Paul here in Galatians is saying these people came from James. But in Acts, it clarifies they came from Judea. They were in James's neighborhood, and James does not side with them. When James gets around to the Council of Jerusalem, he condemns them. He sides with Paul. So no, they're not from James. The other option is James had a radical change of heart. Like the Judaizers, after this visit in 45, becomes a Judaizer, and then at the Council of Jerusalem switches back, which doesn't seem to make sense. It also doesn't line up with what we know of James from the book of James, who is a strong advocate for, he does not advocate for circumcision. I'll just put it that way. He does not say we need to return to the law of Moses. So, put that there. Okay, I have talked a lot. Hopefully I didn't confuse everyone in the class. I confused myself. I forgot what we were talking about. I started talking about Acts instead of Galatians. Keeps happening. Okay, so next time, I guess we'll start with chapter 2, and we'll kind of retread that, and then we'll talk about the conflict, because we'll finally get to that, where we have an issue with Peter and Barnabas both opposing Saul, and what Saul does about it. He calls him out, because he doesn't know how to be quiet. So we'll talk about that. And after we talk about that, we'll talk about the Council of Jerusalem. Oh, and we're not going to do that next week. I'm sorry. Next week, we have a guest coming in that is missionary for the Lutheran Bible translators, Michael Ursland, and his wife, Naomi. They're coming in. That's my wife's brother and our sister-in-law. So they're coming in to talk. They are missionaries in Ghana, and they're hoping to get back there soon. So we'll hear about the missionary project that they're doing there, how they're translating the Old Testament into that. He's actually a really good person if you want to ask Bible translations questions, especially about the Old Testament. Ask him. You know what? Ask him. You have my permission. Ask him if he knows that. Because actually, he is doing he is doing his graduate level thesis on Pharaoh's dreams. So if anyone understands how slavery would work in the time of Joseph, he would actually maybe know that. And what I would like you to do is, like, once he starts talking, just immediately stand up. Like, don't even wait to be called on, just stand up and demand to know answers about how ancient Egyptian slavery worked in the days of Joseph and what their social standing would be compared with the bond slaves listed in the New Testament. And I'll buy you dinner. I mean, I'm sorry, I'll do it. It will make my day if you do that for my brother-in-law. Please do. Yes, please, use some, okay, I'll roll out the light board so he can explain it to you. But honestly, if anyone knows it, he would be somebody who might actually know that because he's working on that right now as a graduate level thesis. Oh man, what fun.
Pastor, you could plant some great questions in your Bible study.
I know that's the only one I need. He's gonna spend, it's gonna take him an hour to get through that one, so we're good. He's afterwards, he's gonna be like, do you know who that woman is? Like, no idea. Like, why'd you slip her a 20? He's like, no, she just seems to need it. Spirit spoke to me. Anyway, let's pray. Dear Lord God, we'd ask that you continue to bless us. We thank you that we are saved by your grace and your grace alone. Help us when there is conflict that we would look to your word for its truth. In your name we pray. Amen.